Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's Ukraine War news update, third part there for the 4th of June 2024. This is a Geopolitics video that I'd started recording this, then the whole bit on Biden and Trump and their views on NATO that have come from several articles. Went on for so long, I've decided to start again and taken what I said there out, and I'm going to turn that into another little extra I'll post later tonight. But we start with Kamala Harris here, who is the Vice President, the US Vice President, and National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan going to the Swiss Peace Summit. So to give you the context there, the Democrats had a big fundraising event that was going to be their big fundraiser that allowed them to, the way that Biden would see this, allow them better probability of winning the election in November. So money translates into grassroots movements and paying for people on the ground in swing states and offices opening here, there and everywhere. And if Biden wants to rule it for a second term, if he wants to win that November election, then he needs that money. But then Switzerland came along, or the peace conference, the peace summit came along in Switzerland from 13th to 15th of June. They decided to put it on those dates that then clashed with Biden's fundraising due. So Biden then said, or his administration said, no, it looks like he's not going to make it because obviously, that fundraising is super important. Now, I know ideally he would go to Switzerland to show as being the icon that he is, show the importance of the peace summit to the whole world by having the head of the US there. Instead, he's going to send the VP, who originally wasn't going to be going either, but sending the VP and Jake Sullivan. Now, I was arguing previously that really the person that should be going probably isn't Biden. At least he can go to be an icon, but the important person is going to be Antony Blinken. So the fact it's Jake Sullivan and not Blinken is a little bit depressing. But maybe, I don't know. I don't know if Jake Sullivan's annoyed so many people because his anti-escalation positioning. Maybe if he goes to that peace summit, he'll get enough of a sense of how important the war is and how much Ukraine need to win that he will actually reverse some of his anti-escalation position. I don't know. Anyway, Harris says, will affirm the United States' support for people of Ukraine and emphasize the Biden's administration's commitment to supporting Ukraine's effort to secure a just and lasting peace. Then we've had Biden in the Time magazine that as I've mentioned, I will talk to you about. He said, essentially one of the things he said is that it's really important that obviously Ukraine prevail, and you can tell from Putin's speech in January or February 2022 what his aims are, and he wants to get the old Soviet Union back, get the old band back together, and have the Donbass or Ukraine, which is an essential part of Russia, back in the Russian fold. But he does talk about how Ukraine doesn't need to be part of NATO, which I think on the face of it is true. It doesn't need to be, and it can't even be part of NATO while there's a war going on. So you need to concentrate on how do you work with Ukraine as not part of NATO, as a country that you are supporting with weaponry, etc., etc. But I think the long-term goal will be Ukraine in NATO. It should be Ukraine being in NATO because then Article 5 kicks in, and it means that Russia won't be able to come back and go for a second bite of the apple. But failing that, they are putting contingency plans in place with countries individually, so that you have all these bilateral security guarantees with each country. And that's really important. An interesting thing Biden says in that is that we are paying a lot to support Ukraine, but Europe is paying more. And you've got to remember that. And that's great that is actually being discussed, because Trump, on the other hand, still keeps coming up with the same old crap that Europe need to pay more because America are paying $100 billion more than Europe, even though that is actually reversed. Anyway, we'll move on. I talked yesterday about the guy from the Grey Zone, the editor of the Grey Zone being called out by the Washington Post for taking money from Iran and Russia, and it's a disinformation entity that is splurging to the American public. This is a real worry, because it's not only about when Russian narratives find fertile ground in the US with the electorate. so that they then have a distorted version of reality and then vote for politicians that fit in with that distorted version of reality. There's also a problem when those politicians themselves take on that disinformation and then feed that to their electorate, and it's this feedback loop of disinformation that goes from elected to electors. And it's a huge problem. And here, Jenke rightly points out yesterday's Washington Post article exposing the grey zone news for taking Russian and Iranian money to push disinformation should be of particular interest to the US Senator based Mike Lee. So Mike Lee is a MAGA senator of the Republican Party who's very pro-Russia and anti-Ukraine. He regularly cites grey zone as an information source. So back in September 2023, when he was trying to call out NATO, someone's behind the pro-Ukraine troll campaign known as NATO. Who is it? A few possible candidates have been suggested. Which one seems most likely to you? And he does a poll. Is it the Pentagon contractor, CIA contractor, Ukraine using American dollars, or George Soros? Of course, it's like talking point, Russian talking point, 1, 2, 3, 4. He is working as an agent. Mike Lee here is working as an agent of the Russian state. And then he's using the grey zone, which is a US news site, scare quotes news site, which receives money from Russia and Iran. You need to be wary, the US, of your own politicians. And it's super problematic. And they need to be called out for disinformation when it is found. And when you're thinking, like, to go back to Trump, when you think about who Trump is, you think about who his son is and what his son is doing at the moment.
All without having to jail your political opponents, which I loved in the speech yesterday.
Exactly.
They're able to video because there's no more crime. You don't have to throw them in jail. Everyone wins.
We don't jail the opposition.
Thank you.
Talking about, not jailing the opposition there. Well, that's nice. So Donald Trump Jr., what's he doing? Oh, he's going to meet the government of El Salvador, pro-Russian government. Oh, right, yeah, this fits in with his entire ecosystem. And it's so depressing, it's so troubling that Donald Trump Jr. is the human being he is. Often spouting talking points that are disinformative about Zelensky, about the war in Ukraine. He's basically a stooge for Russia. And then you're thinking, who's your father? Okay. And what does your father think? Okay, yeah, it all makes sense. Now, talking about disinformation and calling it out, there's a really good Jon Stewart Daily Show video here. And actually, although I'm going to use the example is what Trump said yesterday, but actually the message here is bigger than that and more important. So what happened yesterday? So that Fox News interview that had Trump not being challenged at all by the Fox News reporters, there's three of them just fawning over him and giving him leading questions that were softball, completely softball leading questions. And it was a terrible example of how to interview, and he wasn't held to account, and he got to disinform the audience, right? And one of the things he said was, and this is in the context of the conviction of 34 counts, of felony counts of in the recent trial where he was convicted by a jury of his peers. And he's worried that he's going to go to jail. And he's also worried that lock her up was a big mantra in his 2016 campaign. And he's thinking, oh my goodness, right? If I was extolling the virtues of locking her up for the email thing that never even got anywhere, and I've actually been convicted, what does that say about me? I should be locked up. So that logic should really transfer onto me. So therefore, I can't say that I said lock her up. So then in the interview, he denied, he said, I didn't say lock her up. It was the crowd that said it. I didn't say lock her up. To which all the TV, the liberal comedians like Jon Stewart and Seth Meyers all have segments on going, do I, should I, do I? Yes, I will. And they showed all the clips of him saying lock her up. All of the clips of him, or many clips of him very clearly saying lock her up. And then even in the public debate with Hillary Clinton, he didn't say lock her up. He said, I'll put you in prison or something like that, which is synonymous. So what we have is the previous president of the US, and I talked about this the other day about lying in public. What happens when you lie? Surely you need to be held to account. Now, I'm not talking about like some kind of legal ramifications for him lying, but what Jon Stewart goes on to say is like we need reporters and journalists, not just to talk about, what will happen in the future if you do this, talk about speculative thinking to do with future. We need to be speaking to these politicians predominantly and asking them questions about the present, and if they lie about the present, then we need to call them out on that. There's no accountability, it appears, from journalists in so many at so many times. So there's Fox News journalists laughing away with Trump. Ha ha ha. Actually should have been like, oh, hang on, mate. You just said, you didn't say lock her up. We're going to call you out on that. It shouldn't be up to comedians to call out, to do better jobs at reporting news than fricking journalists, right? And Jon Stewart here does such a good job at the end of that video of talking to that. Really good. But again, we've just got politicians openly lying, and it's not good enough. So anyway, just going back to the whole Biden on NATO thing, then there's this massive article in The Atlantic, typically long article. Europeans are watching the US election very, very closely. That's what I talk about in the later video that I've kind of recorded this part, and we'll throw it into a later bit of output. What Europe fears, American allies see the second Trump term as all but inevitable. The anxiety is massive. Now, I don't think Trump will get elected in ceteris paribus at the moment, all things remaining equal. I don't think he will get voted in, but it will require the Democrat electorate, the voters, to mobilize. But I think Trump will be losing enough voters from convictions and from kind of what he's saying. And if that recording of him using the N-word about black people from The Apprentice comes out as an October surprise, I think he's going to lose a significant enough portion of voters that he will struggle to get in. But it would require Democrats to get enough voters to go out. And I don't think you can maybe scare people about Trump, but I don't know that there's enough positivity for Biden to make it as easy as I'd like. But anyway, this article looks at why people like me keep talking about Trump. As simple as that. Why do I keep talking about it? And it bores some of you, and you're like, I'm not interested, or you like Trump, or you secretly like Trump, and you don't like me slagging him off. And therefore, you don't want me to talk about him. But the point is that politicians and diplomats all over Europe are absolutely obsessed with the November election. And that's what this article talks about. And for good reason. And you look at his foreign diplomacy in his last tenure, Trump, and you look at why people are worried. You look at the sorts of people he put in as ambassadors, say his ambassador Grenell to Germany, just complete, it's a huge worry. Anyway, there is a great amount of anxiety across Europe over the presidency, and that's why I will continue to talk about it. Now, going on to talk more about disinformation just for a wee while. What happened was it yesterday? 2nd of June, so 2 days ago. Who got married? Rupert Murdoch, at the ripe old age of 1,000,007 or whatever he is, 93. He got married to who? Oh, a Russian. Oh, right, a 67-year-old Russian woman. Okay, and he's one of the most powerful media magnates in the world, and he owns Fox News. Oh, right, so is that going to compromise output from Murdoch media sources? The fact that he's together with a Russian? I don't know. It's all very worrying. Right, talking about disinformation and espionage, Euromaidan Press here reports that Polish cybersecurity thwarted a Russian attack on the country's critical infrastructure, said Deputy Prime Minister Gorkowski. Currently, the Polish government plans to allocate over $750 million for a cyber shield amid cyber war with Russia. There are growing issues between many European nations and Russia, Poland particularly, and there's this acceptance, I think an increasing acceptance, that Russia is involved seriously in cyber war and espionage on a very overt and combative level. At the same time, Polish authorities have now arrested 18 people over the past 6 months on suspicions of pursuing hostile activities or sabotage in collaboration with either Russia or Belarus, according to Polish Interior Minister Tomasz Siemoniak. Yesterday. This is serious. Like I keep saying, I think we're in World War III, and it's just that most people don't realise it. Anton Gershchenko talks again in the context of propaganda and disinformation about Russian funds and how Russia are funding propaganda in Europe through an organisation called Pravfond. This is from The Guardian. There have been a number of articles coming out recently and nuggets of information about certain organisations that Russia has within Europe that are supposed to be like cultural organisations or whatever, but are just Russian information influence entities, if you like. So this one in particular, the leak of internal documents has revealed the activities of the Russian state-supported legal defence foundation Pravfond, which has spent millions of euros in propaganda in 48 countries in Europe and around the world. Pravfond funded propaganda websites targeting Europeans. In particular, hundreds of thousands of euros went to support several websites aimed at fighting Russophobia and promoting the protection of the Russian language in Europe. Pravfond helped pay for lawyers for Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout and murderer Vadim Krasikov. The organization's leadership includes former Russian intelligence agents. For example, Vladimir Pozdorovkin is an agent of the Russian Foreign Intelligence Services, SVR, and who oversees Pravfond's activities in the Nordic and Baltic countries. Anatoly Sorokin is a curator of the Middle East, Moldova and Transnistria, an SVR agent. The head of the Institute of the Russian Diaspora, which is listed in the official documents as the project executor of the Pravfond, is Sergei Panteliev. He was sanctioned by the EU as an employee of the Russian military intelligence unit specializing in psychological warfare operations. So, make up your own mind on that, but it's pretty freaking obvious who these guys really are. In 2020, the Estonian intelligence services called Pravfond a pseudo-legal protection system that, quote, in reality is an influence operations fund, and said that the Russian security services, the FSB, uses the group to recruit agents abroad, in particular among supporters of the occupation of Crimea. Pravfond was established in 2012 by the presidential decree with the support of the Russian Foreign Ministry and a federal agency, Rosotrudnichevsk, which manages foreign aid. Alexander Udaltsov, who has been under EU sanctions since 2023 for supporting and implementing actions and policies which undermine and threaten the territorial integrity, sovereignty and independence of Ukraine, was appointed as the foundation's director. So this is a really nefarious organisation funneling money into Europe to spread disinformation and work on disinformation projects. Now, there are also other entities that have been found out recently that I could also go into, but it's pretty much the same kind of thing as this. We are finding more and more out, and it is scary how many fingers in how many European pies the Russian Federation have. I mean, their return on investment, I think, is probably quite phenomenal for what they put into say troll farms and stuff like this. I'm fairly sure that they are properly informing European and indeed American politics in a way that would have been unthinkable during the Cold War. Not so easy. We live in an internet age where information flows freely, and as a result, we are much more susceptible to be manipulated by foreign entities such as this and as Russia as a whole. Okay, Swiss Parliament has rejected a $5.5 billion aid plan for Ukraine, according to Reuters. The reason is that the plan violates restrictions on borrowing from a neutral country. The aid for Ukraine wants to be used to support the reconstruction and repair of civilian infrastructure, the article says. That's really sad news because that was looking like it was going to go ahead. I think it was a several-year plan, but my goodness, Switzerland, sort it out, please. During Lukashenko, so the Belarusian dictator's visit to Mongolia, the capital Ulaanbaatar, a man ran into the central square with a Ukrainian flag. Love it. Absolutely pelting through the central square with the Ukrainian flag there, with the big Belarusian flag in the background. So good stuff for that person. Putin has started wearing body armor in public and at public events. So Russian security services have unprecedentedly increased Putin's already high level of protection. On the recommendation of the security services, he was wearing a bulletproof vest during public events outdoors, two Russian officials told the Moscow Times, and a source close to the Kremlin confirmed. I think this is not unusual or not unpredictable because let's face it, the war is not going great. He's going to have an increasing discontent within the nation, but also as the war drags on, is more and more likely to be targeted in any kind of coup or political I guess, coup d'etat, political or military. So yeah, that's what he's doing. Turkey, I need to look into this, has only just come out before I started recording, but Turkey has announced its desire to join BRICS instead of the EU. So the EU, or Turkey has wanted to join the EU since 1999. In 2016, I remember my dad telling me, because he was a big Leave voter, saying, oh, Turkey are going to join the EU, 80 million Turks are suddenly going to swarm into the UK, into the EU, and therefore the UK. I was like, they will never join the EU because they don't qualify on any of the metrics. Like freedom of press, they don't even get on freedom of press. So, end of. But it was a real warning. People were like, oh, Turkey, you're going to join the EU. Turkey, you're going to join the EU. 8 years later, they're even further away from joining the EU. Right? So, who knew? My dad didn't know what he's talking about, and I did. Sorry, Dad. But anyway, that's what happens when you just read the Daily Express. The reality is, though, they are getting further away from joining the EU. They're a member of NATO, but they have a foot in both sides of the fence there and talking out both sides of their mouth. You got Russia over there, and you got NATO and the EU over there. And actually wanting to join BRICS, it doesn't surprise me this, but it is a huge concern. Turkey's foreign minister believes it could be a, quote, good alternative to the EU, according to South China Morning Post. Of course, we would like to become a member of BRICS. Let's see how things go this year, Fidan said during a visit to China. Ankara intends to participate in a BRICS ministerial meeting in Russia next week. Russia and Sudan are reportedly close to signing a 25-year deal entailing mutual military cooperation and access to Russia to Port Sudan on the Red Sea. The Qatari media outlet Al Sharq reported today. Now, this, again, doesn't surprise me. Ukraine's special forces are operating in Sudan to try and fight in fighting the Russians at the moment. Russians are doing influence operations all across the Sahel region of Africa. They not only have hydrocarbons and diamonds and gold to get out of there to help fund their entire country, but their war effort, but also the strategic importance of Sudan with a port on the Red Sea. It's why they're in Syria. The only reason Russia have been involved in the civil war in Syria on behalf of Bashar al-Assad is because there's a port on the Mediterranean. Russia want access to that port. They get it. That's why really one of the main reasons they are interested in Ukraine so much is the deep sea warm water port in the Black Sea. It's about influence operations. You have a port in the Mediterranean, in the Black Sea, and on the Red Sea, and you can access all the main parts of the world, really. And that's central area of the world, and that's what Russia get. This is incredibly important. NATO has created a plan to move US troops to Europe in case of a war with Russia, says the Daily Telegraph. I don't think this is remotely newsworthy at all, but I'll tell you that that's what people are talking about. Several land corridors are being created to replace the main ones, which involves landing US troops in the port of Rotterdam and moving them to Poland via the Netherlands and Germany by rail if necessary. The raison d'etre of NATO is to combat Russia in a war, or the Soviet Union in a war, right? So if they didn't have a plan for what would happen if Russia attacked Europe, I'd be asking, what the frick have you been doing for the last 75 years? You got the 75th anniversary coming out of NATO, and if you don't have a plan for the actual thing that NATO's been designed for, then... So, yeah, this is not news as far as I'm concerned, although lots of people are talking about it. Norway's top general says NATO has a 2 to 3 year window to prepare before Russia rebuilds its ability to launch conventional attacks. I think that's probably over-egging it, but of course, if you're a top NATO general, you're going to be like trying to argue that NATO is really important and we need to do things and we need to be prepared. And actually, yep, go for it, because it's better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. But I think conventionally Russia is screwed for, goodness me, 15 years plus in terms of generating force quantity of personnel, decent trained troops and equipment. They have chomped through so much of their equipment that as I keep saying, I think Poland can beat them in a conventional ground war at the moment. So there you go. And as Putin's paranoid, aging kleptocrat phase really sets in, says Jane Kiev, his nationwide police bulletin to arrest anyone attempting to honor Navalny's birthday is ignored by this woman in Novosibirsk that attempts to place flowers. She is arrested because Russia. So it's Navalny's birthday today. Alexei Navalny, he's obviously dead, died in prison recently. The police have been told not to allow any people to show, because this is what freedom looks like in Russia. You can't lay a flower on a piece of stone. You can't do it. That's liberty, guys. And she's rightly saying, you bunch of muppets. I think that loosely translated is, what are you doing? I thought this was a free country. Oh no, I live in a dictatorship and you guys are his lackeys. And you guys suck because you are constraining my freedom. And there you go. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share. Really appreciate all of your support, guys. Speak to you soon. Toodle pips.